If Morgan Stanley is right, and they're frequently viewed as being unduly optimistic, and we further assume a robust 15% compound annual rate of growth in hybrid market penetration for the 2020 to 2030 decade, we would get to 27 million plug-in vehicles, or 7.3% of the fleet in 2030. With another 6 years at 15% compound annual growth, our estimated plug-in vehicles reach 68 million in 2036, which, allowing for fleet growth, represents about 16.4% of the light vehicle fleet. So we have our answer. Given the assumptions, we can expect to see a 10% light vehicle liquid fuel displacement in about 28 years from plug-in hybrids. But note, while we have forecast achieving a 10% displacement of liquid fuel at present growth rates, the light vehicle fleet will have grown from about 250 million vehicles to 413 million, or by 66%. So unless substantial efficiency gains are realized simultaneously through the use of other technological improvements, liquid fuel alternatives, or plug-in hybrid penetration that vastly exceeds the optimistic assumptions I have utilized, we may be using more liquid fuels and possibly even more petroleum in 2036 than we are now. If we are to curtail our petroleum use, we will have to wage the battle broadly on multiple fronts. Plug-in hybrids can make a significant contribution. It's a wonderful technology, but they can only gradually provide a small part of the solution.
Okay, following those racing comments, Bill gets to pitch it. Dr. Fletcher.
So when we start to plan a car, we start 5 years out and work inward, and pretty much then my team gives up 2 years from production. So that's pretty much how it works. On other cars like plug-ins or fuel cells, sometimes we'll start much further out and work toward a product. So we're looking into the crystal ball at what the customer's going to want, what the economic situation is going to be like, what the energy situation and the regulatory situation is going to be like. And of course, today it's different than it's been in the last 5 or 10 years. And we see tremendous volatility in oil prices. They're not going to just go up all the time. They're going to come back down too. And when they come back down, we're going to find out, do we have economic elasticity compared to oil or demand destruction? Sure, there's a lot of people going to smaller cars, but is that if oil and gasoline, if oil goes down to $60 or $70 a barrel, gasoline gets back to $2.50 a gallon, and that very possibly could happen, will that demand stay the same or will we shift back up? Okay, so that's something we need to look at in our crystal ball. What will happen to cap and trade CO2 systems as we start to reduce the carbon? When we talk about these plug-ins being a lower carbon solution, and I'd say that's questionable, and we'll have to talk about that, but if they are a lower cost solution, who owns that carbon? Who owns that cost of carbon reduction for that electric miles traveled? Do I own it at the tailpipe? I think I do, but then that puts a burden on the electric industry because they're burning coal to get that electric miles traveled. So I think we need to have these discussions about that because that affects the cost of my product going out. The other thing is, how do I design the product to get the right price? As you've just heard, we don't need tens of thousands. We don't need demonstration fleets. We don't need government subsidies. None of that's going to work if you're looking toward millions and millions and millions of cars. If you really wanted to, forget the US market, we've got a 1 billion car world fleet that's growing rapidly in India and China and Russia and the Arab countries. So forget the US, because whatever we do to reduce oil consumption, it won't make a drop in the bucket with the increase elsewhere. So those are the kind of issues we need to really affect. We've got to put mass cars out in the market, not just in the US, but in Asia and Europe. In developing countries, the cars have to have 150,000 mile durability, no mistakes, don't kid yourself, no mistakes. And they're going to have to give the consumer what they want. We can, yes, I can drive our plug-ins and we're bringing them in and we've got another wave coming that's more advanced, and another wave behind that. And just because Toyota doesn't talk about that doesn't mean that we're not doing it. But the fact of the matter is there's a huge variability in the gas mileage you get. I see 100 miles per gallon here. And yeah, you can do it if you're driving 35 miles an hour. But if you're on the 110 freeway going to Pasadena, where you've got a on-ramp that's not even long as this stage, you've got to run wide open throttle to get into the lane and not get killed. And when you start doing that, what you start out with a 20-mile range becomes a 5-mile range. And what you start out as 110 miles per gallon ends up being more like the common Prius. So you got to worry about that kind of stuff, because you don't want to send mixed messages out to the customer. You also don't want to say it's always going to be cheaper to drive than a gas car. It may not be. My Prius gets 53 miles a gallon on the 405 every day. At $5 to gas, that's about 10 cents a mile. If I'm driving my car hard, I'm getting on electricity, those costs go up. So you got to be careful about that, okay? And the final thing I'll say, you got to be careful about the packaging on the car. I fought like hell to keep leather out of the interior of the Prius and almost lost my marriage out of it, so.
Well, in Mary Ann's world, being a vegan, there is no leather in your cars anyways. But so before Johnson Controls entrusted me with building their hybrid battery business, I had a previous life at Ford Motor Company where I worked for Mark. And probably the greatest achievement I had in my career was being the chief engineer of the Ford Escape Hybrid. Engineered in the United States, manufactured in the United States, and a really great performing vehicle. I personally have a passion for it, and you'll probably see me jumping out of my chair. But we're all going to see probably 4 things that we want to talk about. You know, the technology roadmap, how are we going to commercialize it in terms of infrastructure and cost? What's the government's role going to be in this? I think what I'd like to spend a minute talking to you about is the technology roadmap. And I think it's really important that if you walk out of this room with one message from me, that is understanding the difference between a hybrid and a plug-in. And when you look at hybrid technology, and let's migrate from nickel metal hydride, which Bill and I have a lot of familiarity with, and we're migrating to lithium ion, which is the technology of the future. When you look at hybrids, I will tell you, those lithium ion batteries are ready to go into production. And in fact, they will be going into production. Johnson Controls staff will be putting lithium ion batteries in the Mercedes S-Class next year. They meet all of the rigorous automotive standards around safety, reliability, performance, and useful life. Now, having said that, plug-ins are a different cat. You're managing a tremendously more significant amount of energy, a very different usage profile. Now, the cool thing is we're taking the learnings out of our hybrids, and we're going to be able to transition that and accelerate it in our PHEV and our EV applications. And as a matter of fact, through those learnings, we now have the confidence. Mark told you we're partnered up with Ford on a plug-in hybrid Escape fleet getting out on the road later this year.